How's it going, everyone? This is Boots with Snapkeep Arcade, back with another standard deck guide. This week we'll be joined by Spencer Howland, host of Constructed Criticism, a Magic podcast focused on improving your skills as a constructed player. Starting next month, Spencer will be joined by two new permanent co-hosts on Constructed Criticism, world champion and soon-to-be Hall of Famer Seth Manfield, and Gold Pro John Stern. So you definitely want to subscribe to Constructed Criticism and consider supporting them on Patreon for even more incredible content. Today, Spencer is going to go over a deck he took to the finals of his local PPTQ, Jeskai Control. It's always a pleasure having you as a guest here at Snapkeep Arcade, Spencer, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about Jeskai Control. Why don't you start by giving us an overview of the deck and its win conditions?
Alright, yeah, so today I'm here to talk to you about another Teferi control deck. Today I want to talk about Jeskai Control. And I specifically want to talk about Jeskai Control incorporating Crackling Drake as its win condition. This is a deck that took 5th place at the online PPTQ. I want to say 2 weeks ago, depending on when you're watching this. And it's a deck that I got to try this weekend at PPTQ and took 2nd place with. And honestly, this is the best mana of any of the control decks that I've played so far in Standard. We have 4 Clifftop Retreat, 4 Glacial Fortress, 3 Island, 1 Plains, 4 Sacred Foundry, 4 Steam Vents, and 4 Sulfur Falls. And when I was looking at this list, I really thought that it would actually have really bad mana. I thought, this is 12 lands that are going to enter the battlefield tap, and this is going to be a real problem for this deck trying to win games of Magic. But you know what happened? I ended up keeping some double check land hands, and it was so easy to just draw into, one of the 10 lands that make them come to play untapped. So, it's 1/6 of your deck is going to make your lands come into play untapped, and it's really easy to make that happen. I think that one of the things that, I've played Blue-White, I've played Esper in this format, and mana's honestly just bad. The next thing that it's really sweet about this deck is the sweepers that it gets to play. So Deafening Clarion plus Crackling Drake is actually just a super sweet interaction. You can choose both modes, deal 3 damage to all creatures, give your Crackling Drake lifelink, wipe your opponent's board, and often be gaining as much as, I definitely gained. I had 2 Drakes in play with 8 power, I gained 16 life and wiped my opponent's board, and the game was just over from that point. And it's just not something that you get out of the sweepers from the black decks. Settle the Wreckage is a 1-of in this deck. I'm playing a 1-of Settle the Wreckage and 2 Cleansing Nova. And the reason for the extra white sweeper is that there's just an uptick in Carnage Tyrant right now. The green-black decks are playing in the main sometimes. You even have different dinosaur ramp decks that are appearing, whether they're green-black, whether they're Naya. You have so many different styles of decks trying to capitalize on Carnage Tyrant. Green-white tokens is a deck that Andrew is really familiar with. That deck is playing Carnage Tyrant. There's just a ton of things that are doing that. So I wanted a total of 4 Cleansing Nova Settle the Wreckage in my 75. And so because of that, I got a Deafening Clarion for that Settle the Wreckage. The next interesting suite of things in this deck is going to be its Counterspell suite. So there's tons of different 2-mana counterspells that you get access to in Standard right now. You have Negate, you have Essence Scatter, you now have Disdainful Stroke, and you have Syncopate. These are all viable cards to be playing some number of in your 75. And for me, the question is whether I want Negate main or Disdainful Stroke main. And I think right now with the presence of the green-black decks, you want Disdainful Stroke. In this deck, I have 1 Disdainful Stroke, 1 Essence Scatter, 4 Sinister Sabotage, and 2 Syncopate as 2-mana counterspells. And one of the reasons that you don't have to play Negate anymore is because of the new card draw spell that this deck has, which is Expansion Explosion. And Expansion Explosion acts as a 2-mana counterspell in a lot of similar fashions that Negate would. Now, it doesn't counter something like a Planeswalker off the bat. That isn't what it's going to do. But it will let you win a counter war. So if I Disdainful Stroke a Planeswalker, they have Negate backup, I can then copy either their Negate or my Disdainful Stroke to once again counter that threat, which is pretty powerful. So it actually acts as an additional pseudo counterspell in the deck, letting you play even more than you could play before. The next thing that we have is the removal package. Between 2 Lava Coil, 2 Justice Strike, 1 Hypothesizzle being one of the I count as a removal spell, you actually have quite a bit of 1-for-1 removal. An Explosion can even act as a removal spell at times if you need it to. Between all of these cards, you're just able to deal with both large creatures and small creatures pretty efficiently, and gaining advantage between Hypothesizzle and Explosion. So creature decks overall are going to have a problem with you because you have such efficient removal and ways to deal with them in the form of the counterspells. The deck is not like the Teferi deck that we talked about before, where basically the way that you'd win 100% of the time is just through Teferi. Teferi is the best card in this deck. You play 4 of them, they're really powerful. But the truth is that this deck is a Crackling Drake deck. I've had Crackling Drake deal 16, 19, 13, and 21 damage just in the PPQ yesterday, all by itself. And there was one game where I had 3 of them in play. And when you have multiple Crackling Drakes in play, your opponent dies really, really quickly. because every spell you do is an additional 2 points of damage. And when you cast something like a Chemister's Insight and then flash back Chemister's Insight and discard an additional spell, it racks up really quick.
So the way I typically think of piloting a control deck is to counter and remove all my opponent's threats until they run out of gas, at which point I play my finishers. When it comes to Crackling Drake, is that a card you want to hold on to, or one best played on turn 4?
Yeah, this is a question that we actually had in our Constructed Critics group. We have a Facebook group for patrons of Constructed Criticism for $5 or more right now, and that's one of the questions that people asked about this deck was, is Crackling Drake, something that I can play early? And the truth is that I've done both now. I've played Crackling Drake on turn 4, untapped, played Teferi. I played Teferi first, and then used Crackling Drake as kind of a 2-mana spell. So it kind of just depends on where you're at in the game with that one. Crackling Drake is insane against the tokens deck, for example. I'll just jam that against tokens as early as possible. They're only going to have about 2 cards that are even going to deal with Crackling Drake, maybe 3, in their removal. And so it just comes down and is a complete wall against the tokens deck. Probably the same thing is true against Mono Red. I haven't played against that deck yet with this particular build. I played against a lot with the blue-white decks, but I would assume the same thing is true there. 4 toughness is a lot for them to deal with. Being able to jam this, get a card out of it, hopefully help me stabilize is going to be a big deal. Whereas in something like the Control Mirror or something against like green-black, I'm going to want to be making sure that I have Counterspell backup for both my Teferis and my Crackling Drakes before I put them into the fray.
Tell me about the 1-of copy of Blink of an Eye in the deck.
Yeah, this is actually a card that I'm not positive on right now. So the list that top-aided the online PTQ, it was playing 2 of them. And I personally think that this deck doesn't need it, but the truth is that if I was playing something over the Blink of an Eye, it would probably end up being something like an X-Line's Binding anyway. So because of that, I was able to get quite a bit of value out of my Blink of an Eye a couple of times. It was not nearly as good as it was in the blue-white decks. So I could totally see Blink of an Eye becoming something else, but it does give you a maximum, the right number of 2-mana interactive spells in your deck when you think about it. No, if you just think about the Syncopates as 2-mana interaction as well, it brings you to 9 total 2-mana interactions, not counting Expansion Explosion either. So the 2 Syncopates, the Blink of an Eye, the 2 Justice Strikes, the 2 Lava Coils, the Essence Scatter, and the Disdainful Stroke, and that's a pretty big game. The Disdainful Stroke probably wouldn't count in that slot against the decks that you care about Blink of an Eye in. Being that, but it gives you the right number of effects that we talked about the tempo advantage that this deck gets, and that's going to help it maintain that even in games where it's not drawing its cards.
So I haven't seen any lists outside of this one playing Hypothesizzle. What made you decide to run it?
Yeah, so this is my spice. I was actually playing 2 of them at the PPTQ yesterday, but the card was actually really good. It killed Crackling Drakes. It killed is it Shalai? What's the 3/4 angel?
Shalai, Voice of Plenty.
Yeah, it killed Shalai's. Like, the card actually just put in so much work. I was playing 2 of them yesterday, but I realized how good Expansion Explosion was, and I just wanted to play a 3rd one of those. So I cut the 2nd Hypothesizzle. But I actually really did like the split between Chemister's Insight, Explosion, and Hypothesizzle. I thought that my opponent couldn't actually play around Hypothesizzle, Settle the Wreckage, and Explosion at the same time. And it was a really nice, get 'em scenario where they can't play around all 3 of them.
One thing that really stands out to me in this list is the single copy of Search for Azcanta. Why did you decide to only play 1?
Yeah, this is another holdover from that list that top-aided the PTQ. However, this is something I noticed in Blue-White Control and Modern, is that you actually don't really care about playing Search for Azcanta on turn 2. The reason to play Search for Azcanta in multiples is that you have enough of them early in the matchups like Blue-White Control and things like that. Those other control mirrors maybe against Esper. And honestly, the truth is that Search for Azcanta is going to be insane whenever you play it. It's so hard to deal with efficiently due to the number of counter spells that your deck plays, and when it comes down, you go through so much of your deck with this deck and cast so many spells that Search for Azcanta is basically always going to flip. So actually only having 1 really didn't bother me all day, and I don't know that I would go to a 2nd one at this point. It's going to be an insane top deck, and then it's still going to be a good early turn play. That's actually a pretty good role for a 1-of to play in your deck. When you consider that you're playing 4 Crackling Drakes and 4 Teferi and so much other card draw, you don't really need the 2nd Search for Azcanta to be making sure that you're flipping it. I don't know if you've played a lot of the modern control deck that plays Search for Azcanta, but you know, they were playing quite a few Search for Azcanta early in that deck, and they've started trimming them because they realized you actually don't want to play it early. You can't afford to do it. But it's still this insane late game play for that deck to just play it, say go. If they don't deal with it, it flips, and the game's probably over from there. And honestly, this control deck has that same play pattern. I can play this for free when I have a Teferi play, and now, even if they deal with my Teferi, they're probably just going to lose to the Search for Azcanta flipping. And I got to do it for free. And so having that one of in your deck is really powerful, but I think that the format is kind of punishing to tapping out on turn 2. And so for that reason, I'm not sure that I want to play Search yet.
Let's go over the removal cards in the deck.
So I specifically want to talk about Justice Strike and Lava Coil together, if we can. One of the things that the list online had was 4 Justice Strike main, 4 Lava Coil on this side. That's 8 2-mana removal spells in your 75. In a deck that plays Deafening Clarion as a 4 of at the time, and Cleansing Nova, like, it was just so much removal. And the truth is like, your hardest card to deal with is going to be Rekindling Phoenix anyway. So I just cut 2 Justice Strikes and moved 2 Lava Coils from the board to open up my sideboard for kind of some different cards, you know, like a Nezahal and Nixalan's Binding, which we can get into later. But I think that there's a few things that are really cool about Jeskai control, and that's that your 2-mana removal can be played for free pretty easily. So in blue-white control, you were playing like Seal Away and things like that, and if you wanted to play it for free, they had to have already attacked with their creatures when you have a Teferi in play. Whereas with Justice Strike and Lava Coil, you can just play the spell and then untap your Lens with Teferi anyway and be really, really happy about it and use it on any target you want, which wasn't true of Seal Away. But actually playing these 2-mana cards actually makes your Teferi even more powerful than it was at blue-white control.
Awesome. Tell us about the sweepers in the deck.
I think that the right number of sweepers is going to be really important in Jeskai control because you have the best sweepers in Magic. It's actually a really good, important reason to play the deck. So the list on the PTQ online, it had 4 Deafening Clarion, and I knew, like I said before, that Carnage Giant was going to be a big deal. So I cut one for a Settle the Wreckage, and I really, really liked that suite, that 3-mana, 1 4-mana, 2 5-mana suite there, and they did such different things that they were good in different matchups, and let me board accordingly. And I think that just the pure power level of these sweepers is pretty impressive. Being able to give my Crackling Drake's lifelink with Deafening Clarion just completely shuts the door on aggro decks and on token stacks in a way that blue-eye control just kind of couldn't do. Overall, I think that they are all serving the right roles, you know, whether it's making sure that I'm stable with my Crackling Drakes, keeping my Teferis alive, or just, you know, dealing with really hard to deal with permanents like Carnage Tyrant and Chromium. I think that they all serve a really important role in the deck.
All right, so that pretty much covers the main deck. Do you have any tips and tricks?
Yeah, I have a few tips and tricks. So one of them is expansion. So there were definitely multiple times yesterday where my opponent tapped their mana on turn 2 to play the Surveil discard spell, and I just copied it. So a pretty often play pattern for your opponents are going to be trying to get you to discard your counter spells so that they can protect their planeswalkers against you to come down for free without fear of counter spells. But what you do in response is you just copy their discard spell and take their planeswalker. And I did that probably 3 times yesterday. It is not something this deck should get to do, but I do get to do it, and it's pretty fun and pretty tilting for your opponent. Some of the other sweet interactions, we've already talked about the Clarion, Crackling Drake one, which is pretty freaking amazing. And I think that it's important to kind of remember what Teferi does. You still are going to win some number of games where you're just going to ultimate your Teferi, and you're going to sit back and exile all of their lands, and then eventually you're going to start tucking your Teferi, and they're going to lose the game that way if you don't have any Crackling Drakes left. I didn't have a game end that way. I was just able to kill them with whatever Crackling Drake I drew, but it does make it basically impossible for your opponent to win once you have the Teferi emblem go off, and so protecting the queen, so to speak, is still something you're going to do in this deck quite a bit.
I've seen a lot of people using expansion to copy a Chemister's Insight. Is that something you'd recommend doing?
That's certainly a time where you can do that. I specifically like doing that on the flashback side. If they're jump starting it and you can use your explosion that way, it's a little bit better because you're actually up cards on that exchange. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think that the draw 2 mode of expansion is certainly possible. One of the problems that I have with control mirrors recently is that it's not always correct to be trying to draw as many cards as possible. What you're really trying to do is protect your threats and sculpt your hand. So, you know, either countering or copying draw spells is something that can lead you down a path of not having the correct answers for a Teferi or a Crackling Drake when push comes to shove. So you have to be really careful about how you use something like an expansion in the control mirror, and you have to really not have the cards needed at that time in order to want to copy something like Chemister's Insight, I find.
Let's go into a little more detail on Explosion. When is the best time to cast it, and typically how much mana do you want to put into it?
I honestly haven't figured it out yet. So the 4 is upfront is a pretty huge cost. So I cast it for 3, I cast it for 4, and I cast it for 11 yesterday. So you cast it for a lot, but it's not quite the same as something like Sphinx Revelation where it shuts the game off all by itself. It gets pretty close. When you get to kill a Planeswalker and draw 3 cards, you know, it pretty much feels like you've won the game. But it's not quite where Sphinx Revelation was. I would just remind people that that both modes target, and they target wherever you want. So you can also deck your opponent this way. I would not be surprised if that's a good way to kill Teferis as they get tucked and you Explosion them back to their hands and kill them.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the main board before we talk about the sideboard?
Yeah, I just want to say that one of the things about Hypothesizzle, which is a card you kind of had questions about. So a lot of people don't quite see the draw of Hypothesizzle. They're like, well, you just draw a land and then you have to discard a spell. And that is true, but if I'm discarding a Lava Coil to deal 4 to a creature at instant speed, and I'm not paying any additional mana for it, and I drew that Lava Coil, I just cast that Lava Coil at instant speed for free. I didn't discard a spell, which is something that I don't think people quite understand, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned.
All right, so let's go over matchups and how to sideboard against them.
Yeah, so I played against Black Green in the finals yesterday, and I'm actually not quite sure the correct way to sideboard against this deck. I think that you don't want your Deafening Clarions for the most part in this anymore. And I think you board in the other Settle the Wreckage, and I also think that you board in Ixalan's Binding at this point. And then the player of the draw, according to where you're at, depends on where you want Syncopate and when you want Disdainful Stroke and things like that. You know, honestly, Black Green's not the one where I feel the most comfortable. I'm not sure if I want Lava Coil over Justice Strike. I'm not sure if I want Lyra over, you know, some other cards. And the reason for that is because the black-green decks have probably 3 different, very unique builds. And you're going to want to play, like Lava Coil becomes significantly better against, a super grindy Finebroker deck. Whereas Lyra might become better against a straight mid-rangey version of the deck. And you really have to understand which version of green-black you're playing against and then sideboard accordingly. You can't just have kind of a net sideboard plan against green-black right now, I think, which is another reason that Disdainful Stroke, Negate, Lyra, Ixalan's Binding, like these are all pretty wide margin cards on the number of decks that you could possibly bring them in against, and I think that green-black is a reason that you have to build your sideboard that way. So I think the way that you try and beat green-black is mostly on the stack. So you basically don't want their creatures hitting the battlefield outside of their explore creatures. You're mostly okay with their squires, their merfolk, branch walkers, their Jade Light Rangers. You're mostly fine with those hitting the battlefield. You'll deal with those when the time comes. The thing that you need to worry about is them gaining enough value, and specifically looping things like Pladecrafter. Pladecrafter is actually pretty insane against you. It's going to kill your Teferis. It's going to make it so you can't cast your Teferis or Crackling Drakes, and you need to make sure that those cards, as well as Golgari Finebroker, aren't hitting the battlefield and giving them back. So you're going to try and do that on the stack with Disdainful Stroke and Syncopate and Essence Scatter, and then kind of understanding where to go from there. The other thing is, I think that people are starting to centralize on Memorial Folly as, a 2-of in the deck, which is pretty rough for you, which is another reason why you're going to try to bring in Ixalan's Binding to make sure that you have enough exile effects for their deck. And any time that you can settle one of their value creatures that's not a explore creature, I think that you'll probably take up that opportunity. And I think pretty often what's going to end up happening, at least what I noticed, is you're probably going to win after you've drawn a bunch of cards, kind of clear the board, and you're going to one-shot them or two-shot them with a Crackling Drake. Once they're out of resources, you're going to resolve a Crackling Drake and hit them a few times, and that's probably how the game's going to end.
How does Jeskai control match up against various tokens decks?
Yeah, tokens is actually pretty simple. So for tokens, I think that you board in Settle the Wreckage, and I think that you board in the counterspells accordingly, depending on which version of tokens you're playing against. And I also, depending on the player of the draw, I did try Lyra against tokens, but ended up not liking it. But I totally think that like 1 Settle and then 1 Negate, and then Disdainful Stroke or Negate, depending on the player of the draw for Syncopate, is totally reasonable. I think Blink of an Eye is kind of bad. I would board that out. And then I think that you probably can board out either Essence Scatter or one of your removal spells, a Lava Coil or a Justice Strike, and be pretty happy from there. I also boarded out Search for Azcanta against tokens. I don't think it was necessary literally at all, and I was pretty happy not having it in my deck. I kind of mentioned it during the main part of the deck tech, but you very much are just trying to resolve a Crackling Drake, swipe their board with a sweeper, and then win from there. They can't attack into Crackling Drake profitably, and then once you sweep the board, Teferi is just going to give you so much card advantage that you're going to win. I beat tokens twice yesterday, and I don't think that it was even a close matchup. I think that most people will be able to figure out pretty quickly to use their life total as a resource, sweep the board, and then kill them with some Drakes.
How about mono red aggro?
Yeah, I think that mono red is going to be a pretty popular matchup that you're going to have to worry about. You're going to board in all 3 Lyras, probably 2 Negates and the Lava Coils in that matchup. And I am going to board out, probably 1 Expansion Expulsion in that matchup, as well as search for Azcanta. And depending on the player of the draw, we'll once again talk about the Syncopate thing. I don't want Syncopate on the draw ever against mono red. And from there, I think that you got to decide how good Cleansing Nova is in the matchup, depending on how they build their deck. I typically find 5 mana sweepers to be pretty bad against mono red, and I'd much rather just have Lyra there.
Perfect. Now let's go deep into each card in the sideboard.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 1 Invoke the Divine, 1 Settle the Wreckage, 3 Lyra, Ral is it Viceroy, 1 Nezahal Primal Tide, 3 Negate, 2 Disdainful Stroke, 1 Ixalan's Binding, and 2 Lava Coil. So mostly in this sideboard, the key things are we have 3 Lyra instead of 2. And the reason for that is because I think that if you're not going to play something like a Night package, which I don't think you should in this Jeskai mana base, I want as many Lyras as possible to make sure that I draw them against mono red, because I'm not going to have things stick around early. The other thing you'll notice is the Nezahal. I think that having Nezahal is pretty backbreaking in the control mirror. I beat control 3 times yesterday, and I think that Nezahal is pretty actually much the reason that it happened. Like, I thought it was better than Chromium in every matchup. I thought my deck was better executed to have Nezahal. And it was a pretty big game. Ral is a Viceroy is just another kind of card advantage engine that is hard to deal with. And then Ixalan's Binding was kind of a nice catch-all, something I really liked having access to deal with hard to deal with permanents, things like that. It's over a Sorcerer's Spyglass, and I think I kind of liked it better. I brought it in against control. I think that having that just hit a Teferi when they're not expecting it is a pretty big game. And then, depending on the large creatures that you might play against, I played against Naya Ramp Dinos yesterday. Brought in Ixalan's Binding, was really happy that I got to deal with their large creatures that way. So I think that it's just the versatility of Ixalan's Binding, and you'll kind of know, like, all right, I don't actually have a good way to deal with this thing. Let's bring in Binding as kind of a catch-all for it. I have yet to board in Invoke the Divine, but I will let you know if I'm going to take the card out of my sideboard. I'm not sure. I think that it's specifically for blue-white control. So they're going to have Ixalan's Binding, and they're going to have Sorcerer's Spyglass against you. And so because of that, you're going to want that, but there might not be blue-white control anymore. And I don't think that there's enough enchantments for that. So Invoke the Divine might get the cut here. Another thing to note is that Ixalan's Binding kills niv-mizzet without casting an instant sorcery, just so you know.
One thing I've noticed about your list is that you don't run niv-mizzet. Can you explain that decision?
I think that card's bad. Yeah, I think that I do. I think that it's 6 mana for a card that, while will get you your card back, hasn't done more than that from what I've seen. My opponent cast a niv-mizzet, and I actually used 3 counterspells on it, knowing that it wouldn't get countered, so that I could grow my Crackling Drakes and just attack them and kill them. Yeah, Crackling Drake has honestly been the best card for me, and the non-inclusion of niv-mizzet is like, what card in my deck is worse than niv-mizzet in the matchups I want niv-mizzet? And it could be that maybe that's a great way to beat black-green more consistently, is just Crackling Drakes and niv-mizzets. But, if you really wanted to go on beating black-green, you should just probably play a Night package with History of Benalia. So it kind of just depends. For me, I just haven't been impressed with it.
All right, Spencer, is there anything you'd like to add about the deck?
Yeah, I think this deck is super fun. This is the most fun I've actually had playing a control deck in quite a while. And that being said, I played control almost all of last season. This deck is more fun in basically every way, and I really do recommend it. It's just a good time. It's so fun.
Spencer, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about Jeskai Control. Let everyone know a little bit about Constructed Criticism.
Yeah, constructedcriticism.com is a content website focusing on podcasts and videos. We have a daily stream for the Trophy Mages with myself and 2 other people. We've got Common Knowledge, a podcast about getting better at Magic the Gathering. We've got Constructed Criticism, which is my podcast. I will be joined by Hall of Fame, I don't even know what he's called, elect Seth Manfield. So he'll be put into the Hall of Fame, I think, at the next Pro Tour. He might be in the Hall of Fame when he joins, I'm not sure. But him and John Stern, Gold Pro, are going to be joining the show in November, so that's exciting. The first episode will be Patreon only. You can go to patreon.com/ccmtg to listen to me interview them before the Pro Tour about their process and the decks that they're playing. And then their first show for everybody that will be live and free will be right after the Pro Tour. So that's really exciting. Then we have Limited Time Only is going to be returning soon. you can look for an episode of that. Probably in the week that you hear this, I will have done an episode with Chantel Campbell, who just finished hashtag 100 days of draft, where she drafted every day for 100 days. So I'm going to talk to her about that process. And then, we have 2 new podcasts in Even Odds, which is a podcast by Mason Clark and Trey McClellan. I don't know how to say Trey's name. I'm sorry, Trey. And it's about being a PPTQ grinder and the things that you can do to improve on the PPTQ circuit. And then we have Homeward Path, which is a more casual podcast by an MTG dad trying to get better at the game with limited time on his hands. It's hard being a dad and playing Magic. And so every week he drives home from work and talks in his car about the process that he's going through to try and get better at Magic or better at life and dealing with Magic on a budget, Magic with kids and things like that. So, and then we have, we're not done. And then we have Constructed Clash is a video series I do with Mason every week where you get to watch both sides. One side is for the public, one side is on Patreon, and we play a matchup, and then we do a post game and talk about the play. So it's pretty sweet. And then we do deck techs. So, we just have a whole YouTube channel of other things going on. So, yeah, we got a lot going on.
Again, thank you so much to Spencer from Constructed Criticism. I highly recommend their content and will provide a link to their website in the description, so make sure to check them out. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe to Snapkeep Arcade and hit that bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. This has been Boots with Snapkeep Arcade. Thanks for watching.